Welcome to PD Connect, connecting the Parkinson's community with resources, information, and each other.
Today, we're very pleased to welcome Sharon Krischer to the podcast. Sharon is an active blogger in the Parkinson's community. She's also participated in an amazing initiative by the Parkinsons Foundation that focuses on issues unique to women living with Parkinson's. We're excited to talk about that initiative on this episode. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on it.
We're glad you can join us.
Sharon, I'd like to kick things off by sharing with our listeners a little bit about your blog, which has a very creative, a great name. It's called Twitchy Woman. If you could talk a little bit about what led you to create that blog and some of the information that's available on it.
Well, I'll start with the name. My husband and I have an argument as to who came up with it because he's the king of nicknames. But obviously, Twitchy Woman is a play on Witchy Woman. And it just fit. It worked. I have tremor-dominant Parkinson's, so I'm very twitchy. I started the blog because I was receiving phone calls from people. Can you talk to my cousin? Can you talk to my coworker? Can you talk to my friend who has Parkinson's? Somehow I became the person who knew about Parkinson's and could talk to people about it. I don't know how that happened. We can go into that later, but I became that person, and then I started thinking, well, I have all these people who are contacting me who have Parkinson's. Maybe I should start writing the things we're talking about and putting them in a blog, and that's how this whole thing started. This was about 4 years ago. So I was diagnosed almost 10 years ago, so it was about 6 years after I had been diagnosed that I started writing. I was pretty much in a fog for the first 4 or 5 years. It took a long time to come out of it before I could come out and say, I have Parkinson's and start reaching out to other people.
One of the things that's amazing on this show is how often as we do this podcast, how often we find parallels between the guest on the show and Tanya's experience with Parkinson's or our joint experience as a married couple living with it. And as you know, from having talked to Tanya before, she had a similar experience of not being able to talk about it for a long time, and then becoming a blogger subsequent to that. But here's a really funny parallel in something you just said. You and your husband, you said, have an argument or debate about who came up with the name of your blog. Tanya's blog is called The Shoe Maven, and Tanya and I have had the same argument.
Oh, that's funny.
And not a real, argument, but we really can't recall which one of us specifically said The Shoe Maven.
I can recall. I did.
And that.
Well, I swear that I did, and he says that he did. So, it's a he said, she said situation.
Well, I think our listeners have just learned how all arguments in our household are resolved. Well, going back to your blog, Twitchy Woman, one of the things I really like about it is it's got great resources on it, like so many of the blogs we see out there from people living with Parkinson's that offer not only their own insight, but connect people in the community to resources that exist elsewhere. You've got books on there that you recommend and that have been recommended by others. You've got recommended browsing on there that has links to other blogs in the Parkinson's community. You've got other resources, readily available links to various organizations and foundations. And those are all great resources. And I would encourage our listeners to go to twitchywoman.com and to look at those, to look at the blog, look at you've got a lot of your own blog posts, which is fantastic, and they're categorized and can easily be navigated. But
thank you.
Absolutely. And one of the things I want to talk about in particular is you've got books and blogs that are written from the perspective of a woman living with Parkinson's, which relates a lot to what we're going to talk about today in today's episode.
Okay.
And so I wanted to point that out to our listeners. One of the other really interesting things that you've done is you are the founder of a women's PD group in Los Angeles, which you do not call a support group. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. A little over 3 years ago, I went to the Women in PD Initiative. Was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago? I can't even remember. It all blends together. The Parkinson's Disease Foundation, which is now the Parkinson's Foundation, had a seminar in September 2015, I believe, called the Women in PD Initiative. And I heard about it from another blogger. I had recently started my blog, and I was taking a an online blogging class through WordPress, which is the platform I use. And they suggested one of the assignments was to read other blogs and sign up on them. So I had signed up for several Parkinson's blogs, women's Parkinson's blogs, and somehow found out about this Women in PD initiative. So I went online, checked it out. I knew nothing about the Parkinson's Disease Foundation prior to that time. And I applied for a spot. They were only taking 25 women. And it happened to fall between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which the Jewish holidays in September. And I needed to make my plans because of the holidays. And I needed to know if I was going to get into this program. So I started hounding Ronnie Todaro, who was running it from the Parkinson's Disease Foundation. And finally, I got in. And one of our assignments was to go home and do something back in our communities for women. And my initial plan, I met with Jen Parkinson, who I believe you know, who also has Parkinson's disease. And Jen and I were going to do something jointly in the Los Angeles area, but we lived too far apart and it just wasn't going to work. So I invited the women that were on my Parkinson's blog list to a meeting at my house. And I got 3 responses. And the day before, one person called me and said, I can't come. I'm afraid. I've never met another woman with Parkinson's disease. And I had already met several people for coffee. So I said to her, why don't we get together and meet for coffee? So I had 2 people at my house that first meeting. And we decided, let's do something at a restaurant. We'll have somebody come in and speak. So we planned the next meeting. In the meantime, I met with this 3rd woman and she started coming to everything. It changed her life. And what we decided was we didn't want to be a support group. We wanted to be a place where women with Parkinson's could get together and just be themselves, have a good time, meet other women with Parkinson's in a no-pressure situation. We weren't going to do gripe sessions. We were just going to have fun. And so we had our next meeting at a restaurant. I believe we had 15 women, and it just took off from there. And for about 2 years, I was trying to plan things every month, and then it just became overwhelming. So I have another woman who's helping me, and we do things as they come to us. You know, we get approached by people saying, I have somebody who wants to come speak. Can we do a meeting? And so it's continuing. We may meet 3 or 4 or 5 times a year instead of 12 times a year. But we have met so many wonderful women in the Los Angeles area, and it's so spread out, as you know. I have women coming from 30 miles away to the meetings because they want to meet with other women with Parkinson's.
That's unbelievable. 30 miles in LA is like 5 hours, right?
Right. Actually, we have one woman who has come. I haven't seen her in a while, but she has come from Mammoth Mountain, which is a 5-hour drive north at a ski resort. She will come to LA for the weekend with her husband occasionally to come to our meetings if they're interesting for her.
That's amazing. And what that highlights, I think, is the need for, and something we talked about off the air and a part of the focus of this episode, is that there are individuals out there living with Parkinson's, and in particular women out there living with Parkinson's, who are desperately trying to find a way to connect with other women to share the unique experience of a woman living with the disease. And the reason I know a little bit about that, and I'll say just a little bit about that, is because I witnessed Tanya living through the same experience. We talked about this a little bit off the air of how, like you, Tanya, for a long time struggled to, or did not have the opportunity to meet another woman living with Parkinson's. I mean, it was years in, right, Tanya?
I think it was 6 years in.
6
or
years
7.
in.
Yeah.
6 or 7 years before she met another woman who was living with the disease. Now, nothing makes you feel more isolated than that.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of the things that when you first told us about this group, we're not going to call it a support group, this women's group, was when the first time we all met in person, or at least the first time I met you in person. And I remember my reaction was, I absolutely love the concept of this, because a support group can feel heavy. It can feel, you know, very serious and just sort of emotionally draining, I think, from what I've seen of Tanya's experience at times with support groups. Whereas if it's just a women's group and it's not always centered around discussion about Parkinson's, you can connect I would think you can connect in such a different way.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, we call it the Women's Non-Support Support Group.
I love that.
We've changed our official name several times, but now we're just Twitchy Women. That's our official name. And we have some meetings where the husbands or care partners are invited. We have something coming up next week at a museum, seeing an exhibit on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then we're having a tea afterwards. And it's open to everybody. There's nothing Parkinson's related, but we're getting together. It's kind of a holiday get together.
I wish I lived closer.
Yeah.
I would attend.
Well, and that whole approach to me is so much more inviting and so much more open than, again, the label of, it's just a label, but the label of a support group, because as Tanya can share, she struggled for a long time with the idea of going to a support group, even though she desperately needed some way to connect with other people living with Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm. I never went to a support group. Well, I take that back. I went twice, but that was much later, and it was once as a speaker to one support group, and another time just to check out a group, and I hated it. So I never went again. But I met a lot of people there who I remained connected to. So there is that advantage. But I also go to boxing classes, and that has become a major support group for all of us in the class. It started out as Rocksteady Boxing. It's now called Stop PD. It's in New York and Los Angeles. And for the first year or so, I think I was the only woman in the group. So talk about isolation.
Right. But
it didn't matter. They loved me and I loved them. So we all got along. And now we've had other women come and go. There's one other woman who's been in the class for a couple of years with me. And we are very, very good friends. And we joke because these other women come a couple of times, then they don't come back. They go on a different day. We don't see them. So if Marcy's out or I'm out, we're the only one there. But it doesn't matter because we're all friends. We all connect.
Right. And that, I appreciate you bringing up the boxing group, because that really, again, I think illustrates the important point. It's not that any of us are saying that support groups aren't a positive thing. I think support groups, particularly if you find one where the dynamic works for you, is a fantastic resource. But you're not limited, as a person living with Parkinson's, you're not limited to connecting through support groups. You can find other types of groups of individuals that meet, whether it's for boxing classes or other exercise classes. I think there's yoga classes for Parkinson's, whether it's a more informal group like the group that you formed in Los Angeles, whether it's through a foundation, whether it's through membership in Team Fox. But as the title of this podcast continues to emphasize, part of our message is to connect, and to connect not only with resources, but to connect with each other. And, both of the group that you've started, that you described, as well as the connections you made through the boxing program, really emphasize that point, or illustrate is a better word, really illustrate the fact that there are different ways that you can go out and try to connect with other members of the community.
Absolutely. And if a support group isn't your thing, find an exercise class with other people with Parkinson's, because that will become your support group. Or we have a music group called Music Men's Minds. I don't go to it, but people sing, they play instruments, and they became a group. There are Dance for Parkinson's classes. Whatever it is, you meet other people that you can connect with. And you don't have to explain to them how you're feeling, because they know how you're feeling. You can look at somebody's face and know whether they're having a good or bad day. And we all support each other.
Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned a moment ago was the Women in PD initiative of the Parkinson's Foundation, and how that led you to ultimately create the group in your own community. That initiative is one of the things we brought you on the episode to talk about today. So could you share with the listeners a little bit more about the background of that initiative and the purpose, and just some other thoughts on it?
Okay, that initiative came up about 4 years ago. Somebody, and I don't recall who it was, it might have been Robin Morgan, who is on the radio, who also has PD, and was one of the 4 chairs of this event, said to Ronnie Teodoro, "We don't want to be treated like mini men." There had been a lot of controversy over the years because of medications that only been tested on men, so they were given to women who were half the size of the men, but given the same dose. So they found that women were reacting differently to medications. And that as they started looking further and further, women were not little men. There were a lot of differences, and especially with hormones and women with young onset, especially. For me, that wasn't an issue because mine came later. But hormones and how that affects symptoms. And so they decided to bring together 25 women to New Jersey, to some hotel near the airport. And we met for 2.5 days, I think. And we had all kinds of speakers come in and talk to us about everything, about the science of PD, causes, sexuality, therapy, all kinds of wonderful speakers. And then we were given the charge to go home and do something in our community. As I said, a number of women did one-off events, which were great. We had tried to do that here in LA. It just wasn't going to work because we're so spread out. And Jen and I live 50 miles apart. But Jen does her neuroboxing thing, and she's an amazing person as well. This is someone who was diagnosed at, I think, age 31 with 2 little kids at home, and her husband left her and she couldn't get out of bed. Somebody talked her into going to boxing, and it changed her life. You wouldn't know most of the time that she has Parkinson's. She's amazing. But we've all found something that has made a difference in our lives. For me, it's boxing and yoga. Keep me going, keep me moving, and meeting with other people. It took a long time, as I said before, to even admit that I had Parkinson's to myself, to my family, and then to my friends. It was really difficult. But going to this conference made it all come together for me. And I had already started my blog, but then that just made it easier for me to reach out to other women after we had met. They gave me the resources to do so. And then that was in September, and then the following August, I think, I received a call from Ronnie Tadaro, who was I'm trying to think the timing of this. Maybe it was 1.5 years later. It was after the WPC in Portland. I get a phone call from Ronnie. This was after the Parkinson's Disease Foundation and the Parkinson's Foundation in Florida merged.
Okay.
And they had applied for a grant for a program they called Women in PD Talk, which was to bring together women at 10 sites around the country to talk about Parkinson's disease, living with Parkinson's disease, along with medical personnel, caregivers, stakeholders, different people who were involved in Parkinson's care, and come up with some recommendations for and action plans for women living with PD. And I get a call from Ronnie. They needed a patient advocate to be one of the chairs of this event. They were applying for a PCORI grant, which is Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute in Washington. And because it's patient-centered, a patient had to be at one of the lead people on the project. So they asked me to be the Parkinson's lead, along with Dr. Allison Willis from Penn. And we put together these 10 sites, along with Ronnie and with Megan Feeney in the Parkinson's Foundation office. And Megan was amazing. She really coordinated the whole thing. But we had 10 seminars across the country, 10 forums in different cities, and usually about 5 or 6 hours. In the morning, we'd have lectures from different experts about different aspects, risk, treatment. Offhand, I can't remember the other things, but risk, treatment, I can't even remember right now. It'll come to me. This is one of the things I'll have to get back to you on. And then in the afternoon, we got into breakout groups and we talked about these different things and came up with, we listened to the women with Parkinson's. We said, what do you think caused your Parkinson's? What kind of medications are you taking? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? And we had similar discussions in other groups that were medical personnel, that were caregivers. And we had a national forum in October where we brought together the national leaders from the 10 forums, along with some other national leaders. And we are in the process now of putting together a paper which we hope to present at the World Parkinson's Congress in Kyoto.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, so you met this past October with the leaders of each of the regional groups?
Yes.
Okay. Or forums. And so what's the current plan? What's sort of the next step for the Women in PD Initiative? Because as I understand, all that was done under that Women in PD Initiative of the Parkinson's Foundation, under the umbrella of that initiative, right?
Right. Okay, so what they have done, we've put together a program that can be done pretty much anywhere, a couple-hour program. It won't go nearly as intense as what we did because it won't be fact-finding, but it will give people the opportunity to come together, women to come together in a community and talk about these issues. So it's basically a program in a box. So if Tanya wanted to run this program in your hometown and invite 20 or 30 women with Parkinson's, along with some doctors and physical therapists and whoever, it's all there for you to use. There's a PowerPoint and everything. So we want to make sure that this information gets out.
That's awesome.
And is that, I would assume the best way to find that information is to go to the Parkinson's Foundation website.
Right. And just look up Women in PD Talk or Women in Parkinsons Initiative.
Okay. And it's got a search function on the site that'll allow you to do that. Or you, honestly, these days you can probably Google it. It'll take you right to the page on the website.
Right.
And if we may put a link to that in our show notes or our summary of the show as well, as to where you can link to that information. And so what is in terms of the program it's really a program in a can for what you just described that anyone in the Parkinson's community could run in their own area. How is the Parkinson's Foundation kind of putting that information out there? Is it just through people like you who are spreading the word as well as the website, or are they working with, they've got local chapters too, I think, that they work with as well? That
they have people around the country that work for them, and I'm not quite sure how. I know that it's on the website, but I believe that once we get the report out, there will be a big push to get the program in a box out there.
I got you.
Because once we have our results, it'll make it easy. That will all become part of it.
Well, and that's one of the reasons we brought you on now, is because we want to make our listeners aware that you are working towards finalizing the details of this program in a box, great way to put it, and to make that available, which I think is going to be a fantastic resource for the community. And we want people to go to the website and kind of start following this information. I assume you'll also talk about it on your blog, Twitchy Woman, once there's more information to be made available.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Right, I'm trying to find the topics, and I'm sorry I haven't been more. Let's see. Okay, the 4 topics we talked about were risk. What are the risk factors for getting Parkinson's, whether they're genetic, biological, or environmental? The symptoms, motor and non-motor symptoms, treatment, and care.
Okay, and all of that was talked about from the unique perspective of women living with the disease?
Yes, and by women who were doctors, physical therapists, caregivers, whatever they may have been. And there were some men involved too, because several husbands were invited to come to give their perspective in the breakout groups. And one of the interesting things that came out of all of this is that many women, especially women my age and older, are not being taken care of for their Parkinson's because they are caregivers for ailing husbands, for parents, for children, and they don't have time to be taken care of. They don't have the resources.
Yeah, I think that hits on a great point. Even for me, I'm worried about raising my son, taking care of him, getting him to doctor's appointments. And I think it's a female issue directly. I mean, we always are taking care of other people, that we put ourselves on the back burner. And when you have Parkinson's and you put yourself on the back burner, that's not good.
No, it's not. And so what happens is you get caught up in other things. You don't exercise. You don't take care of yourself properly. And they find that women end up in nursing homes at a greater rate than the men because they don't have anybody to take care of them.
It's and I think when you're in a situation where you have a care partner, a spouse, or a care partner, then it becomes really important for the care partner to focus on encouraging and nudging the person living with Parkinson's to better care for themselves. You have to be more active in that. You can't sit there quietly. I can only speak from my own perspective, but I've come to realize after years of being with Tanya, living with this disease, the importance of me really recognizing when she's not getting enough sleep, she's not eating right, she hasn't gone to exercise, because you can see the effects of it. And
my husband says the same thing too. We will be out, and he'll look at me and say, "We need to go home. I can see it in your face. It's time to go home." Or, "You need to exercise. Forget about doing whatever it was you're going to do." And if I were too busy taking care of somebody, I wouldn't have somebody to tell me, to be able to push me to do those things.
We lived this out actually on Saturday. We struck out on a distance run, an organized race in our community, and it just wasn't our day. And I won't just say it wasn't Tanya's day, because I wasn't having a particularly great day either. But yeah. Tanya was, for a variety of reasons, struggling that day. And, it was a half marathon, and we're 4 miles in, and I'm looking at her going, "You don't have the gas in the tank today." I mean, I think she actually used that phrase when I brought it up, but I kept looking at her and saying, "Are you okay? I mean, are you doing all right?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm all right," but I could see her struggling. And so it just reached a point where I just looked at her and, we had a conversation, and my whole viewpoint was, or what I was trying to communicate to her was, you don't have to do this. I mean, you're not proving anything. You've done this. You've run a marathon. Like, this is not a good day for this. And that's okay. And you just have to, as the person who loves the person living with the disease and is there to be supportive, you have to recognize sometimes that being supportive means saying, "Look, we need to navigate this differently. We need to make a different decision, or you need to take time for yourself. We're good. I'm good. Our son's good. Take time for you. Go do what you need to do. Prioritize it." Because health should come number one for everyone, but particularly it needs to come first for when you're living with a chronic illness that requires daily management. I mean, you got to every day make your health a priority. So, well, going back to your role as a blogger, one of the things that we talked about off the air that I wanted to make sure that we mentioned to our listeners is that you have also been selected as one of the bloggers for WPC in Kyoto, and which is in, I don't know why this is slipping my mind, it's 2019, right?
Yeah, in June.
Right, June of 2019. And so for those who don't know, the WPC years in advance sends out or publishes that there are open invitations for people to volunteer to be bloggers and to apply for it. And you were selected. And can you talk a little bit about kind of what the role of a blogger is for WPC 2019, and then maybe where people can find not only your content, but the content of the other bloggers?
Okay. They sent out, I think it was, about a year and a half ago already. You had to apply to become an official blogger. And I think I pestered them too, because I do that.
If it works,
it worked, obviously. I was one of the 12 who were selected. And one of our roles was to write, they send out a blog every month about the WPC. And we each had to choose a month during the 2-year period running up to it to write a blog specifically for them. And I did one in March. We were going to Israel in February, and I knew that I was going to be meeting with some doctors there to talk to them about what was going on there as far as research. So I thought I would write a blog post for March. And what I ended up writing about was the global community of Parkinson's, because the research that's going on is truly global, the things that are going on in the Parkinson's world. So we had to do that, and then we have to do some follow-up after the conference, but also promote the WPC on our blog sites. So we all have a little widget, I guess it is, on our blog posts, and you can see it, you click on it, and it gives you all the information. And I believe on that, it's an official blogger widget, and if you click on that, it gives you all the bloggers. You can get to their websites. But I also have all of their websites listed under resources. So
on your Twitchy Woman blog site, right?
Yeah, I think it's under resources. It's on one of the pages. And the idea is that we promote the conference and then talk about it afterwards. And when I went to Portland, that was my first time going to it. And I actually wrote a blog every day while I was there about the things I had seen, the things I had done, and how exciting it was to be there. And I'm sure that helped. And what was interesting was that I noticed that the people who were official bloggers weren't doing that, but some of them referred to what I had written in their blog posts afterwards, which was really interesting. It was really exciting to be part of that.
We went to the Portland WPC as well, and that was our first one. And it was just amazing. It was kind of overwhelming in some ways to be surrounded by that many people, in the PD community, whatever role, from healthcare provider, allied health, caregiver, supporter, patient. It was just unbelievable experience for me.
Me too. And what I found, I think this is the only conference that I know of where the patients go and they are on equal footing with the researchers, with the doctors, you could go to any session you wanted to. Didn't matter how technical it was. Nobody was going to turn you away unless there wasn't room. No question was dismissed. We could ask whatever we wanted. We could talk to whomever. And I thought it was an amazing, amazing experience. But one thing I noticed as I ran around with 3 other women from Los Angeles the whole time is that most of the women came alone and the men all brought their wives.
Well, I went with Tanya, so I may have been in the minority, but I'm truly glad that I went. And we actually brought our son. And it's funny, as you were saying, how there was an opportunity for everyone. They even found an opportunity for our son, who at the time was, how old was Chase at the time? 9 years old, and they were amazing. They let him volunteer at the booth where they were selling merchandise related to the event, and they found something for him to do, and it was his first really opportunity to connect with the community. And I have to tell you, I think it was very therapeutic for him too.
Mm-hmm. Because kids I think they feel some hopelessness because there's nothing they can really do.
Yeah,
but for him to have an active role, he didn't want to leave at the end of the day.
That's wonderful.
It really was. And I'm sure, this has kind of turned into a little bit of a shout out for WPC 2019, which is great. And I'm sure we'll have other guests on in the future to talk a little bit more about that, especially as it gets closer. But one of the things that I think is so vital to your role as a blogger is obviously not everyone is going to be able to make the trip to Japan to go to WPC. And so by following the bloggers and reading that content, and as you pointed out, they can go to your site as a starting point to start reading what all the bloggers are writing, they can connect with it. And then, there'll be I'm sure there are other ways as well to benefit from what will be presented at the next WPC. But, and for those listeners who don't know, it was mentioned earlier in the episode, but WPC is the World Parkinson's Congress. I do want to go back to something we talked about, or one of the things we were trying to figure out earlier in the episode, which was what's the easiest way on the Parkinson's Foundation website to get to the Women's Initiative or the Women in PD Talk. And I have now confirmed, since I'm sitting in front of a computer, that if you Google search the Parkinson's Foundation and Women Initiative, it pops right up. I think it pops right up if you type in the Parkinson's Foundation and Women in PD Talk, and it takes you straight to the page, makes it easier.
Oh.
That's an easier way to get to it, as opposed to going to the website. At least the link was rather lengthy. So rather than sharing the link on the air, I'll share the best way to get through it through Google, which is how we find everything these days.
Okay.
Let me just ask you real quick, is there anything else you can think of that we would want to talk about with respect to the Women's Initiative?
I think once we have our final report, we're going to get it out there. We're going to disseminate it. We are submitting it to the WPC. I'm not sure if we will have a session or if it will be a poster with a talk. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, they have poster displays where you can submit a poster on a myriad number of topics, whether it's research or there's all different kinds of things. There's even things for people with Parkinson's to submit about living well with Parkinson's. And I actually just submitted an abstract for a poster for something that I was interested in following up on the Women in PD Talk initiative. But they have all these posters, giant posters on display with all this work that people have been doing over the past 3 years. And they actually have poster tours where they take you around to talk with with selected people about what their research was, which is really interesting. And what I did was I posted a question on a Facebook group, a women's Facebook group, about living with Parkinson's. What were the top 3 things that helped them to live well with Parkinson's and the top 3 things that were obstacles? And I've had responses from about 55 women so far, and it's very interesting. And the number one thing, of course, for living well with Parkinson's across the board was exercise. And the number one thing that was an obstacle was lack of sleep.
Yep. I can check both those boxes.
We just recently had a conversation about the fact that Tanya's not currently getting enough sleep and that the effect that that's having on her. So
and I'm not getting enough exercise. Which good, the correlation, I mean, there's a direct correlation.
I mean, there are days where you just feel like, oh my God, I cannot get out of bed and go to yoga class today. It's just not going to happen. And I'll force myself to, and I always feel better afterwards. But just getting there.
I know.
So last night's 3 hours of sleep was not a good thing.
Well, I think we've shared a lot of great information for our listeners that's available on your website, through the Parkinson's Foundation, resources in particular with a focus on living with Parkinson's. And we really appreciate you coming on the show today to share that information. We'd encourage people again to go to twitchywoman.com, your website, where they can navigate through all kinds of valuable resources, including books, your blog posts, and connections to the other bloggers who are resources out there, including bloggers who are blogging for WPC 2019. And also, as we talked about, to go to, whether through Google or through the Parkinson's Foundation website, to search for the Women in PD Talk or the Women's Initiative so that they can monitor, keep up with the developments with that program and the release of the program in a box, which I think is going to be a fantastic resource in the different local Parkinson's communities throughout our country and beyond. So thanks again for being on the show today. We look forward to bringing you on in future episodes to talk about some different topics that Tanya and I are already kicking around in our head.
Okay. It would be my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of PD Connect. Please help us connect with the Parkinson's community by spreading the word about this podcast. You can find us online at pdconnect.org and on Facebook at PD Connect Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at PD_Connect. Again, that's PD_Connect. Until next time, this is Chad and Tanya signing off.